Okay, well, thank you. Welcome to Temple University Japan campus. You've all read the biographies of our two distinguished speakers. So I'll just say that Guibourg will first speak and introduce her book project, and then we'll have some comments from Dr. Nagao, and then we'll have our usual Q&A session. There are, I think, some drinks on the side left, but maybe they're all gone already, no? And we'll end around 2, but we know that a lot of you are very busy, so don't feel bad if you have to leave before the end. So without further ado, we'll just start in 2 minutes. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert, for inviting me. And I was going to say that I was a adjunct fellow here at Temple, so it's very nice to be here. I've been coming to this place for quite some years. So I'm very happy today to introduce a book which will be published now in the fall by Routledge in London. And so it's very nice to speak to you a little bit in advance, because we're finalizing the manuscript. I'm working on the introduction still, so you know your comments will be extremely useful. So the project was my idea. It's actually an edited volume. The idea what I really wanted was to get the Japanese to speak about their country's power, so to really describe what they thought as the strengths and weaknesses of Japan today. And so I've only got Japanese authors writing, apart from the introduction, which I write, of course. So to give you an idea, I mean, it was actually in the invitation, but to give you an idea of the people which I have in the project, and I tried, of course, to get some people who'd be representative and who'd be senior, and which was a great challenge, because there are great. There's quite a number of security experts, of course, in Japan, and all very good. And so the choice was essentially who said yes to my request, and of course I would have liked to have many more authors. But anyway, I've got Fujiwara Kiichi from Tokyo University. I'll say them in order of appearance, because the first part is on Japan as regional and global power. The second part is on the economic and strategic challenges, and the third part is on internal politics as a challenge, and other issues around that idea. So in the first part, I've got Fujiwara Kiichi, whom I'm sure you know, Yago Kazuhiko from Waseda Daigaku, who's a financial historian, so a specialist of financial institutions. Akiyama Nobumasa, who's currently posted in Vienna, who's a nuclear industry expert, and also writes a lot about the United Nations and Japan's policies within the UN, in particular, non-proliferation and issues like that. I have Kanehara Nobukatsu, who is Naikaku Kanbo Fukuchoukan-ho, which is Deputy Security Advisor to the Prime Minister. So he's a very senior bureaucrat. And a security affairs specialist. He was posted in South Korea at the embassy, and knows a lot about a great number of things. In part 2, so the economic and defense challenges, I've got Tadokoro Masayuki from Keio Daigaku, Kitaoka Shinichi, who is currently the head of JICA, and who prior to that you would know Kitaoka Sensei. He's a security expert as well, and has written a lot about many things, actually, but initially he was a specialist of the Liberal Democratic Party, about relations between the armed forces and politics in history. And then he was an advisor to the Prime Minister over the defense reform, which took place in 2015. Kami Yamatake is a national defense academic professor, and he wrote about the Japan-US alliance, which is his field. And then in internal politics as a field, as a source of weakness, I found somebody to write about history issues, which of course is always a challenge. And Yamamoto Yoshinobu, former University of Tokyo professor, does that with great skill. And then Nonaka Naoto, who is the professor at Gakushuin, is an expert on internal politics. He's very good at comparative politics. He's often in Paris researching the French political system, in London as well, sent over by the Diet. So he's a very good, he has great knowledge of parliamentary workings. And so he talks about the way in which internal politics really can hamper decision making. And then I've got Nagashima Akihisa sensei, who's a policy advisor, was kind enough to come today, and was a great help in writing the chapter. Nagashima sensei just left Minshinto, but he's a security expert from the opposition. So I was really quite happy to manage to get a team of authors, a group of authors who are both from the left and the right, meaning they're from Minshinto essentially, or the Democrats' side, and from the LDP or close to the LDP, and that was good. So as to the substance of the book, I mean, the reason why I sort of decided to write a book about Japan's power is that my field is Japan's defense policy, but also that I was really struck by the contrast in the powers between, or the difference in nature, of the French and Japanese powers. What I mean by that is that, in particular, I was struck by this between 2013 and 2015, when there were terrorism crisis in France, in Paris, and at the same time there was in 2013 the innominous hostage crisis in Algeria, where Japan lost many people, a hostage crisis, and then in February 2015, Japan lost 2 journalists who died. And so I was struck by the fact that France, conversely, actually helped free Japanese diplomats from the Ivory Coast embassy, and also managed to have many of its own hostages freed in the same time, and also to deal with anti-terrorism in a great way, and to actually kill in a hostage crisis, to kill the terrorists without having any hostage killed, with great skill. So I was struck by the fact that the French had this, even though being a middle power, a small power, had this ability to mastered really this very rare skill of anti-terrorism and hostage rescue. And of course, there are other contrasting points. Of course, the Security Council permanent member seat, of course, and the fact that France will intervene, for instance, in the Syrian war, and has faraway territories, and therefore a reach, all the way to the Pacific. And whereas the reverse is not true of Japan, which seems such a great power. So that was initially the idea stemmed from this observation I made, and really by what I wanted to do, my aim was really to get Japanese experts to speak for themselves and to get them known overseas. So hopefully, the book will achieve this. Now, as to Japan's power itself, I can make a few comments, and I'd be very happy to take your questions if you'd like. Japan's power, and sorry, I should go down my PowerPoint a bit. I first, of course, in my introduction, defined power. Well, I'm probably not going to do this here, but there's a realist and liberal stance, of course, and Japan, from both points of view, more realist or more liberal, is a bit of a puzzle even today. But of course, Japan's power is really changing. It's really changing because it used to be, and it's been changing, of course, since the end of the Cold War. It became this massive economic power, of course, in the 1960s, then a financial power in the 1980s, and gradually, with the end of the Cold War in the 1990s, this a reflection emerged as to what kind of power should be Japan's power from now on. Given that its contribution to the world's security could not be the same anymore because of the end of the Cold War. So and the development of international cooperation. So and of course a big step was taken in 2015 with Prime Minister's defense reforms, which hardened, if I may say so, Japan's power a great deal. And of course, Japan has some amount of soft power, but then that remains limited. And of course, soft power is a very different, of a different nature altogether. And the question remains as to whether initially soft power was conceived by Joseph Nye as something which came. It was a sort of natural power once you had hard power. So you did not need to use hard power when you had it. and therefore you could revert to soft power instead. And so it is a derivative, or it stems from hard power initially. And of course the concept evolved over time, and soft power became a sort of concept, which is used in many different ways, and not necessarily associated with hard power anymore. So Japan does have some amount of soft power, but that of course is a different issue. Now then, the weaknesses which remain. There are economic challenges which are really massive. The great public debt, demographics are a big problem. And of course, as far as the 2015 reforms go, well, they took Japan really a step further in terms of being able to do whatever it wants, more or less. So, of course, the Article 9 remains, but, the constraints and what there will be from now on, well, we'll see, really, because indeed, the fact that collective self-defense can be used means that if a conflict is considered to have serious consequences enough, is considered to be of some consequence to the vital interests of Japan, then Japan can back an ally which has been attacked. So that means, what this means exactly is that it remains to be seen, really. PKO peacekeeping operation, it might mean, helping out the American soldiers which are struggling, or the South Korean ones. It might mean also intervening in a contingency if South Korea is being attacked by North Korea. So it can potentially take Japan quite far. But I think that Article 9 remains, and also really the government will be wary of intervening in any kind of conflict. And that's certainly not what they want, or what the self-defense forces want. So the limit is legal, but really essentially political now. And of course, the other question, as far as security issues go, is what to expect of the US, and how will the US-Japan alliance work from now on, knowing that 10 years ago, Japan would have been able to fight off China fairly easily by itself. It would have been autonomous enough. And today, given the capabilities of China, it's not the case anymore. So Japan would indeed need the US to step in quite quickly. Now, another point which the book makes is history, and history indeed is important, because in the way it is dealt, it has repercussions on Japan's image. And that's something that policymakers probably don't always have in mind here. And internal politics as well are an issue, because the way in which security is dealt with here is addressed is not always optimal, in the sense that security issues remain very divisive, and sometimes the national interest would require cooperation. So that's another point that's fairly important. So I think that's the end of these are the main points that the book makes. Again, my hope is that the book will be read overseas and will attract attention, because it's Japanese experts speaking, and this, I think, is valuable in itself. And that was that's really the original what stands out in the book's project. And distinguishes it from others, and I hope also that it might attract attention in Japan, perhaps be published in Japan someday, because these people are experts in Japan, and what they say matters, and sometimes they speak in a different way when it's for an overseas audience, and hopefully the editor plays a role as well. So. And I'll be looking forward to your comments, both on the book itself or on the substance. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Guibourg. So we're very happy to have Professor Nagao. So Professor Nagao, 10-15 minutes, and then we'll have our discussion. Thank you. Well, that's okay. Everybody calls me professor, and then I say I'm not a professor, and then they apologize. They call me director.
Thank you very much. Now is the time. Just after lunch, this means that this is a sleeping time. So, but thanks to Professor Robert Derek, I got 15 minutes from now to make presentation as a discussant. And but this presentation includes some important questions I want to ask about especially the title is Japan truly a powerful country? It's a question. I talk about the security, but is Japan powerful? For at least two reasons, the people want to ask this question. All of the sentences written in the PowerPoint. If you want to sleep a little and recover a little, after that you can catch up by using the PowerPoint. And so for at least two reasons, people want to ask this question. First, also Japan has a strong economy. Japan has not shown its presence in the domain of world security. This is first one. Second one, Japan has defensive capability, but no offensive capability. So the economic power do not change the offensive capability in this case. So, however, whether Japan is powerful or not is a psychological question. When the Barack Obama administration hesitated to attack Syria despite the promise to attack when Syria used the chemical weapons in 2030, it seems that the US had retreated from power. When Russians succeeded in Crimea, Ukraine, and Syria from 2040 to 2060, it seems that Putin's Russia was powerful, despite Russia's far weaker military than that of the United States. So when the US under President Donald Trump attacked Syria in 2017, it seems that the US was powerful. So a country that can address the security needs properly is regarded as a powerful. So three questions must be posed the elicited answer as to whether Japan is powerful or powerless. What are the Japan's security needs in the Indo-Pacific? Does Japan have the will and the capability to respond to its needs? And will Japan change to become truly powerful country in the near future? So what are the Japan's security needs in the Indo-Pacific? Salient feature of the recent security situation in the Indo-Pacific are North Korea's missile and missile and nuclear development, and China's maritime assertiveness. So taking China's maritime assertiveness as an example can indicate Japan's security needs in this presentation. So currently, also the Permanent Court of Arbitration rejected China's ownership claim of 90% of the South China Sea in 2060. China is ignoring the verdict and building 3 new airports on their 7 artificial islands in the South China Sea. To identify the security needs, the reason why China's assertiveness identified so much lately is important. It seems that the tendency of China's maritime expansion has been based on military balance. If history is any guide, for example, when France withdrew from Vietnam, or US withdrew from Vietnam, Soviet Union withdrew Vietnam, or US withdrew from the Philippines, China occupied islands in South China Sea. So, as a background reality of the current situation, the military balance between the US and China has also changed after the Cold War. From 2000 to 2060, China has acquired at least 43 submarines. During the same period, US has acquired only 40. So US allies and friendly countries required new security framework to adjust these changing circumstances. So for a long time, bilateral alliance led by US, such as Japan-US, US-Australia, US-Philippines, US-South Korea, have maintained order in the Indo-Pacific. This is an old security framework resembling hub and spoke system. In the system, deep security relations is lacking among the allies. For example, Japan and Australia is not allied. So when US influence declines, the reliability of entire security framework declines. Consequently, the new security framework has emerged. This framework is security network of numerous bilateral, trilateral, quadrilateral, other multilateral cooperation relationship among US allies and friendly countries. This cooperation includes not only US-led cooperation such as Japan, US, Australia, Japan, US, India, Japan, US, Australia, India, but also cooperation by the Japan, Australia, India, Australia, India, Indonesia, notably without include of United States. This is image, the old one and the new one. Old one depends on the US power, but the new system do not depend heavily, but of course US-led system. So this new security framework presents several strong points of marked benefit. First, because this system is not heavily dependent on the US influence, the adverse impact of the declining US influence is expected to be minimal. And secondly, because this system includes India and Southeast Asian countries, which are expected to have rising influence, the security framework can maintain sufficient power for a long time. And furthermore, multilateral system demand that countries adopt a rule-based approach. For that reason, if China, Russia act responsibility under agreed set of rules, they might be allowed to join. Therefore, the new security framework offers an important possibility of reducing regional tension. So what need does Japan have under the new security framework? First, Japan should bear a greater burden of defending itself. Second, it is important for Japan to enhance security cooperation with other US allies and friendly countries in Australia, India, UK, and France. And a third important role for Japan is building the capacity of Southeast Asian Defense Force. Does Japan have the will and the capability to respond to its needs? Japan has already realized the importance of these three matters above. Japan's new marine type ambitious force is one of the symbol. National Security Strategy of Japan, published in 2030, has described as the importance of security cooperation with Australia, India, Southeast Asian countries. So Japan and Australia, the new AXA, the acquisition of the cross-service agreement has concluded. Japan and India, the already defense information sharing agreement. Japan leased the TC-90 training plane to Philippines, patrol vessel Philippines, Vietnam, used the P-3C patrol planes to Vietnam, Sri Lanka in the near future. Nevertheless, it is also true that Japan's cooperation has not included offensive capabilities. For example, in the case of artificial island in South China Sea, China cannot use artificial islands, airfield on the artificial islands safely if coastal countries have the missile with which to attack. So for reason, Vietnam has started to deploy the precision-guided rocket launchers and imported the Crab-S submarine launched missile from Russia, and furthermore, they are planning to import BrahMos cruise missile developed by a joint venture of Russia and India. It is not easy to imagine that Japan will support Vietnam's offensive capability as Russia and India appear to be doing. Does Japan have powerful influence in such case? Vietnam view this perspective. View from this perspective, Japan's influence can be powerful only when other countries provide capability Japan cannot provide. So will Japan change to become truly powerful country in the near future? Also, Japan's influence is limited. It is also true that Japan is changing. Japan planned to export submarine to Australia, failed, but planned. And Japan has started air-to-air missile joint development project with the UK. To defend against missile attack from North Korea, Japan is planning to hold limited offensive capability to destroy missile base. However, one problem remains. Will the US allow Japan to transform itself? For a long time, US did not wish Japan to possess offensive capabilities. For example, when Japan requested the export of the F-22 stealth fighter jet in 2007, the United States refused to request. Possessing the F-22 would signal that Japan can bomb missile site in North Korea independently. So, and for Japan, relations with the United States are the priority. Japan and the United States have created trustworthy relations through close diplomatic coordination during the more than 65 years. Furthermore, the US is the only foreign country to have occupied Japan during its 2,000-year history. Japan will not possess offensive capability if the United States will not allow it. However, signs have pointed to change in the US policy. In the past, the United States has restrained not only Japan, but also other US allies such as Taiwan, South Korea, the Philippines from developing offensive capabilities. But under the rising North Korean threat, United States has already allowed South Korea to develop cruise missile with 800-kilometer range. They succeeded in the first test on April 2017. So this fact has indicated that the United States will allow Japan to possess similar missile in the near future. So conclusion, is Japan powerful? Under current circumstances, Japan has strived to enhance its own defense capability to ease the dependence on the US. And Japan has been increasing its influence by responding to their needs. However, to show its powerful influence using arms export, Japan required collaboration with other countries that can provide offensive capabilities that Japan cannot provide. So in addition, to possess offensive capabilities, Japan must seek permission from the United States. These facts indicate that Japan itself does not seek to become an independent, powerful country with offensive capabilities. Japan will be a powerful country only when the US, its allies, and countries friends to the US, include Australia, India, and Southeast Asian countries, strongly demand that Japan become a powerful country. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me just give the mic. Thank you very much, Dr. Nagao. Now we have time for our usual Q&A discussion sessions. So speak up all your piece forever, as they say. I think the procedure is you can walk up to the microphone here with a question if you wish to be recorded. And if you don't want to be recorded for posterity, you can ask a question from your chair. So whatever you prefer. So, anyway. Yeah. Oui, c'est plus facile si tu... Comme ça, on t'entendra mieux.
Yes, I am Valérie Niquet. Okay. Thank you. So I am Valérie Niquet, and I work for the Foundation for Strategic Research in Paris, and I am, for the time being, at GIA in Tokyo. And I have two comments. First, about the last presentation. Don't you think that things are changing rather rapidly with the election of Donald Trump? He made a point of asking Japan and South Korea to increase their effort in terms of defense capabilities. So the obstacle you raised about Japan being allowed to become more offensive, to get more offensive capabilities, obstacles from outside might be not so important now. And, but it remains that public opinion in Japan might not be ready, in spite of increasing threats from China or from from North Korea, might not be ready to accept that kind of role and capabilities. And my second remark is in that kind of bowl of noodles, new type of security partnership and relations in Asia, the relation between South Korea and Japan seems to be lacking, and there are a lot of difficulties to reinforce defense and strategic cooperation between South Korea and Japan. And how do you see the evolution of this problem after the next election in South Korea? In the context of increasing tensions with North Korea. Thank you.
Can I answer now? Yeah, thank you very much for asking the very important question, especially related with South Korea, the very important aspect of Japan security. And in my presentation, the people can realize there is lack of the name of the one country, South Korea. So relation with South Korea is a little complicated. It is not easy to explain logically because there is some emotional one between the two countries. But under the President Park regime, former President Park, Japan has already concluded sharing the defense-related information agreement. We call this the GSOMIA. And this is a case very similar with Japan-Austria relation and Japan-India relations. And to deal with North Korea, the South Korea has geographic advantage and many information to deal with North Korea. So very important ally for Japan. The cooperation with South Korea is very important. But at the same time, the cooperation with South Korea has an emotional aspect. This is personal opinion, but there is a possibility. One kind of the feeling of the South Korean feels that they are the one kind of the second citizen feeling under the Japan Empire. One kind of the discrimination has existed after the World War II, after the independence. The political regime used this feeling to integrate it their country. That is the reason when Japan tried to ask South Korea the cooperation, every time South Korea doubt this is not equal cooperation. For example, if Japan, when we call the Yodo, the airplane hijacked in the South Korea, this is I forgot the name, but that time Japan asked South Korea to evacuate Japanese prisoners in this airplane. Japan planning to send the plane of the Japan Air Self-Defense Force, but the South Korean answer is, we will intercept the plane first, not plane from the North Korea or something. The plane came from Japan. Is not the enemy for them, but they said their response is like that. To evacuate the Japanese to Japan, from South Korea, Japan cannot send the military airplane. That the situation exists between Japan and South Korea. So this is not simply the logical problem, a little emotional problem. And your question point is in election, new South Korean regime after the election. In this case, there is some worry about new regime will be the regime do not like Japan. But at the same time, both Japan and South Korea are US allies. So, and we have already concluded important agreement sharing information and cooperation. So, if the United States realize how important the relation between Japan and South Korea, by using the US pressure, Japan can persuade South Korea a little, I think. But even if such kind of pressure, the South Korea will, if South Korea decide to resist the cooperation with Japan, there's no option for Japan. Japan is just waiting, I think. Well, that's my answer. A little too long answer, so sorry for that.
Yeah, thank you very much for your remarks from both of you. Professor Delamotte, let me follow up on something that you said, especially about soft power. The first remark was that, paraphrasing, that Japan, or that countries in general derive soft power. Soft power derives from hard power. I would cite the example of the Vatican, for example. No real hard power, but lots of soft power, not just in the church, but in the current Pope. Soft power throughout Latin America and throughout the world. As far as Japan's, you said a fair amount of soft power. I think looking at this part of the world, the immediate neighborhood where Japan occupied its neighboring countries, the soft power isn't very good at all. But and I don't have polls at all, but I think if you asked about likability, my experience, spending a long time in Eastern Europe, that the image of Japan is really strong indeed among young people with manga and anime, with older people, from sushi and God knows what, theater, ikebana, and also the exchange programs are very powerful that the foreign ministry conducts. Also, this JET program has created in the U.S. a huge cohort, thousands of young people who are the kind of exponents of Japanese culture and Japanese society. So I think outside this neighborhood, without polling, maybe you have some, but it seems that Japan's likability and image is really strong.
I agree with you. Yes, absolutely. That's true. Likability is certainly strong. I was referring to the origins of the concept, which I believe was created for the United States, and the idea was really that once you have, Hollywood was soft power, but Hollywood was Hollywood because there was the US's power in the world backing it in a way. So I think the origins of the concept seem to me have been that. But and then it derived from there to being the influence of culture in general. And there I believe, like you, that Japan has a good image in general. Although and I'm not sure to what extent that actually converts into power. I don't know, or influence. I'm not sure. Between what people think, certainly there's this likability, and people like many things about Japan. Certainly France is the second market in the world for manga, so that's huge, and many people love French films, Japanese films, and it's the first overseas cinema in Japan, in France, after the US, of course. So the French, for instance, have certainly the likability in France is very strong. And I believe it's the same in many countries. But to what extent, going from that popular level of consumption in a way, even though it's quite sophisticated consumption, to actual political influence, I don't know to what extent it conveys. It's a question, and certainly as far as the image goes, sometimes when you have and it's become much rarer. I think the Prime Minister Abe has been really good at restraining himself since 2013 and the Yasukuni visit. But certainly with the comfort women at some point there before 2015 at least, around 2007, 2008, he made some statements which were detrimental to Japan's image in the world. And sometimes when you have a statement like that, even visits to the Yasukuni, will trigger comments which are detrimental to Japan's image. And I think sometimes policymakers in Japan underestimate the effect on Japan's image of what they take as a sort of either a right or a point they want to make, or precisely they don't really explain what they seek to achieve. Is it just perhaps they feel that they don't need to explain precisely. That's what they. But in any case, certainly that's detrimental, I believe. But other than that, yes, Japan's image in the world is good, and the BBC rankings place Japan fairly high. So first in 2012. Any other comments?
For ease of recording. I'm Anthony Kuhn with NPR.
They're still on the same subject.
Can you hear? Okay. Is this all right? Is this going to be recorded if I speak through this? Yes. Okay. Hi, I'm Anthony Kuhn with NPR. I'd like to get your thoughts on a scholar who's considered a bit of an outlier or a black sheep, and that's Professor Hugh White of Australian National University. His argument is that Japan is in a strategic dilemma. If it gets too close to China, or if it retreats from Asia too far, Japan feels threatened, it feels exposed, it needs to be reassured. If China and the US become too hostile, then Japan has to worry about getting drawn into a conflict between the US and China. What is the only way out? For Japan to go independent and possibly to go nuclear. How possible is that? At the moment, not likely. And of course, US Vice President Mike Pence is here this week to say nothing could be farther from, nothing could be like that could be possible. And the other point, just briefly, is that Professor White envisions a concert of Asia, a détente among the great powers. And if such a thing is to happen, then Japan must be independent, because if it is a strategic client of either the US or China, the third power that is left out will feel in too weak a position. So what do you think of his idea? Thank you.
Well, Japan has been in a strategic dilemma with the US always, entanglement. Either getting too close and then missing independence, or wanting more autonomy, and or being too independent and then fearing that the US might be too close to China, and so that's the indeed the strategic dilemma does exist, and Japan is sort of finding a middle stance now, I believe, but. Really, for the moment, for Japan to be independent of the US, I don't think is an option, really. I mean, Japan needs the US more than ever now with China. It didn't used to be my view, actually. I was actually quite convinced that Prime Minister Abe's changes and the recent developments of Japan's defense policy, Japan was stronger than in the past, and it is, but indeed China is so much stronger now than it was a few years ago, that indeed the US's power is much needed. So and also I think there's another dimension to the alliance, which is that it's sort of the power enhancer to Japan. So it makes Japan's power and reach wider, and also it gets Japan to be more international, and it helps whenever the government wants to further a policy change. Using the US makes it easier. And provides useful excuses and that's something that's not likely to change. So I think Japan in practice does need the US, and also it's very valuable politically. I think fundamentally that's unlikely to change. And I think the interests of the US, conversely, are really to strengthen the alliance, if anything. Sure, they want good relations with China, but I don't think the mistakes made that China could become an ally or supplement Japan in any way. I mean, I think there's a great distinction that's always been made, and hopefully that will stay the same with Donald Trump. I mean, sure, they do have an interest in cooperating with China on many issues, and that's undoubtable. But for China to become a US friend is unlikely in the near future, whereas Japan will remain the ally which it is, because it's in its own interest. But I also think it's in the US's interest, really. So I don't see that changing. So I don't quite agree with the analysis that you commented on.
Can I just ask you about that argument in relation to your last point? You say Japan will be a powerful country only when the U.S. agrees to it. Would you consider the argument Japan...
He's contradiction in terms.
He's got a report about
Japan will become a powerful country when it feels the U.S. can no longer protect it. Is that a possibility?
Of course, if there is a United States around Japan, for the U.S. Army or U.S. nuclear umbrella, we do not have. Of course, we need to deal with the situation, but it is impossible to imagine such kind of situation, because for United States, to control the Pacific itself, United States needs Japan. And so we cannot imagine that there is no US presence around Japan. And there are one benefit for Japan. If Japan cooperates with the United States, we do not need defense force the eastern side. We can concentrate all of the defense force in the western side if Japan allies with the United States. Very cost effective. So by using this situation, we can concentrate all of the money to the economy, and we developed a lot. That is the reason that Trump said Japan is a free rider, but mutually beneficial for Japan and the United States. So my answer, I should not say too long answer. Simply said, I cannot imagine such kind of situation, even if logically you are right. That is answer.
Can I ask my question now? I come from the business community, not the strategic community, so that's the point that I'd like to address in terms of power or powerless. Over my 40 years in Japan, I've worked in mostly for Japanese companies, and I've been in most of the regions of the world, about 80 countries. And Japan is a very powerful country. We cannot say it is powerless because it has no offense. It is a quite powerful country and has a tremendous amount of respect. In that area, and the countries that I've been, particularly in Southeast Asia, they're very comfortable with Japan having defenses but not real powerful offensive. They feel uncomfortable. And that has to be understood. Working with the Americans, working with other regions or other countries in the regions as a defensive unit, that's something else. But an independent strategically powerful, offensive Japan could be very uncomfortable for its neighbors. And I think that should be addressed in this particular seminar. Thank you.
Well, I think that's true. Actually, I think going from defense to offensive capabilities would change a great deal for. It would indeed have a great impact and probably negative on Japan's image. And even though Japan is trusted, they don't get the same kind of criticism that they from on the part of Southeast Asian countries that they do from South Korea or China. Sometimes really overdone and excessive. But for Japan to become offensive would certainly change a status quo in a way, and certainly makes them uncomfortable. I agree with you. I also think really moving to offensive. I really think the Japanese population is happy with the way things work for the moment and having Article 9, and that's why they demonstrated quite a bit a couple of years ago. I think the government should have that in mind, that, and also I think Article 9 has always been very comfortable for the government to have, that in a way I don't know how they'll manage to say no to the US or by discriminating between vital interests. Saying one interest is not quite vital enough, even though the whole, an international coalition of 40 countries, say, was intervening in a, say, new Iraqi kind situation. How would Japan say that's not vital enough? So having the previous situation, or actually even the new kind of situation with a more limited collective self-defense than the one they seem to actually envisage would have been more comfortable, in my view, to the government than what they decided to do. But I'm not sure of that, and they might decide to adjust. With collective self-defense, the question mark is, to what extent, what does it mean exactly? But from what I understand, it actually means that Japan could intervene, for instance, with South Korea against North Korea. That's what I heard recently, and that actually is not in Japan's interest, in my view, but that kind of interpretation as wide. I think that's getting too close to just being part of a war, and when do you say no afterwards? I think that's. Whereas the idea of providing logistic support, and in that context, being able to provide collective self-defense if need be, in case a problem occurred, in a given operation, was very different. To intervening in a combat situation. So, but we'll see what they decide to do. In any case, the South Korean scenario is, in my view, very theoretical.
My answer is, in this case, what is the truly image of the powerful? If we imagine that Japan will be the empire we have been, such kind of image is no one in the world wish Japan to be the empire. But there is a discussion in Japan which is we should be the normal country. Image is United Kingdom, Australia, India, South Korea, such kind of the countries. So in this case, what is truly the power in this image? There's many powers in the world. The whole country has the power, even if the small countries. But what kind of level of power we should seek, or that we should be? In this case, maybe if the view from the Vietnam, Japan should sell us the missiles Japan has. That is the image in this case currently. In this mean, it is not dangerous if some Japanese insist we should be the truly powerful country to support Vietnam, I think. But no one wishes to be the old empire where regain the power looks like that. That is my answer.
My turn? Yeah, the previous question pretty much said what I wanted to say, so thank you. And in general, my feeling about this lecture is a little bit strange. In the first half, we correctly heard that there's soft power and hard power. And both soft power and hard power, of course, exist. The Vatican was already mentioned. They have zero military, but they have massive amounts of power. Well, look at Saudi Arabia on the other side. Ridiculous military, but they can basically use the American military to do what they want if they, if they are threatened or if they have an interest, like in Syria, replace the Shiite regime with a Sunni regime, which they're working on. And I could go on for hours giving examples about soft power. Japan, for example, yeah, by default, they have massive amounts of soft power. The largest economy and third largest economy in the world. High social cohesion, very, very high level education and work-oriented culture. And Japan has been using soft power, for example, but except they've been picking ridiculous issues where to use it. Look at the whaling issue, for example. Without a military, Japan has been able to pretty much do what they want in spite of the rest of the world being against them. That soft power always has to be based on hard power is simply not true. As you can look around the world, see the big picture, and you see that it doesn't have to work that way. Now, second speaker, yeah, this is pretty much what I hear from it's pretty much the Japanese right-wing position that Japan should have more offensive capability. I have no problem with that. If Japan wants to build a massive military, but I want to know what policy framework do you want to use it in? Right now, Article 9 is very clear, and everybody in the area is comfortable with it. And it has worked out fine for the last 50 years, also for Japan. Japan saves on military expenses, the Americans do the work, and Japan and China do not have to get into a direct confrontation. Okay, the question is, do you want all these submarines and airplanes and military stuff without changing the existing constitution? And if you want to change the constitution, how do you want to change it? That was the question I was leading up to.
So just soft power, I'm not comfortable with the concept, to be honest, because in my view, economic power is economic power, and soft power was a concept created in the 1990s by Joseph Nye, and it's based on culture and film, and so it's something very specific, and people are just using it in any kind of way. What did you say, sorry? Well, yes, but it's not a state. So again, it's sort of is. I mean, the concept's been adapted in many different ways. So Japan undoubtedly has power. That's obvious, and no one would say otherwise. That's. I mean, the question is to what extent manga or sushi can provide any power. So I mean, but of course, if you want to talk about finance and economy. Well, in any case, soft power. It's not. I work on Japan's defense policy, not on soft power. So that's not my area. And as to the constitution,
yeah, a little. Japanese government try to change our capability, even if the situation cannot change the constitution. Of course, the government will try to change the constitution in the next 3 years, I think. But at the same time, even if we cannot change the constitution, we need to deal with the situation. That's true. And interpretation to understand the constitution is a little flexible in current days, and so. In anything we need to do, we can do, I think. But at the same time, we satisfied our life now. That is the situation in Japan. So that means that no one wants to change drastically. We satisfied. This is a completely different situation when we were the empire. We enjoyed life. We enjoyed the economy. So we do not want to change drastically. That means that some people worry about Japan will be a very strong, aggressive country. Looks like the theory of the cap of the bottle. The people believe in the past, but we cannot imagine such kind of situation now. And that is my answer.
Yes, indeed. You know, if Japan wanted to change the constitution, well, it could. And, you know, the idea is that because Japan would change the constitution, it would revert to the 1930s. It's really, you know, obviously. So now, you know, and then in what way, you were asking also in what way they might want to change. So now that would be a debate, you know, a national debate, and that's taking place to a certain extent. I mean, parties are coming up with constitutional drafts and propositions, but that's still, in any case, you know, that's still, there's a long way to go because the population, indeed the majority, doesn't exist. Okay, we'll leave it at that, if you don't mind.
Siegfried Needle, freelancer, journalist from Germany. What does it mean? What does it mean in concrete if Japan buys missiles, long distance missiles? I think we heard about how the fear of the South Korean peoples in the case of bring the Japanese people back from South Korea. The South Korean government wouldn't allow it in the past. So what in South Korea wants to have a longer this kind of missiles, but I guess they wouldn't allow it. So it would oppose the acquirement of this kind of missiles from Japan. So and this way, this would change security situation in Northeast Asia. And I think also China would say, yes, Japan is on a way of a new imperial power, and would also bring more missiles in the area of near to the Japan. So it would not be the result of acquiring long-range missile by Japan. Would not be the result of a new arms race in East Asia.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed your presentation. My name is Khalil. I'm from Bahrain, and please, my comments are very personal. If you look at the world changing very, very fast. Globalization, technology, artificial intelligence are doing a lot of changes. The projection by 2050, Asia will have 50% of the world economy. China will have around 15%. India will have about 10%. Japan will have 2%. If you look at the American views about involving around the world, 80% of the American, they don't want to be involved of the world wars out of their countries. Now, in this picture, how can you imagine that Japan will depend on anybody in 50 and maybe 30 years' time? Yani, is it possible what we've seen after World War II will continue another 20, 30 years? Thank you.
If all of the countries in this region has a long-range missile to attack each other, this is one kind of interesting topic to need to imagine what kind of situation will expected to happen. My answer is we do not need to worry the situation too much is my answer, because during the Cold War, the people worry about missiles. But what happened? There are too much missile that age, but no one fired missile. So yes, that is very important to simulate the situation, but at the same time, the people do not order to fire the missile. People do not easy to decide to fire the missile. So something change will happen if all of the country possess offensive capability, but still the change has happened gradually. This is my opinion, and people will match the situation. Is that the proper answer to the first question?
I think the problem is it's an emotional problem. You cannot argue in a very rational way. It's an emotional problem for South Korean people. They don't think about in the past missiles were fired. I think it's about emotional problem. They still feel, South Korean people still feel Japan wants to conquer Korea.
Yeah, because of the education, they reproduced this image, that's true. But at the same time, yeah, my grandfather was first military attaché in South Korea, and he told me how difficult to deal with them. But it is true. That is the reason I do not want to talk about South Korea. But yes, when Japanese see the Korean movie, if this Korean movie is very good, in Japan, even in Japan, people want to see the Korean movie. And that time, the feeling of the South Korean has a little ease toward Japanese. We have already seen maybe 5 years ago, about 5 years ago. Why? Because view from South Korea, Japanese admire the South Korean movie. Japanese understand how great South Korea made. And so we are now equal friends. Such kind of mood has come. So maybe sometimes we can find a chance to cooperate with South Korea because of this kind of situation. View from Japanese, there is no discrimination, even if the empire age indeed. So, but there is no second citizen that time, legally. I'm not a citizen, but there is, legally we know that. And but their feeling, view from South Korea, different emotional issues exist. So how to solve from Japan side is very difficult indeed, the question for us. So, but sometimes we find a chance to ease mood, and we should use the time. For example, we have already implemented Japan-Korea joint World Cup. Why? Because Japan respects South Korea. Japan's government has will to ease the situation always. Simply said, the door is open, they said. And that is my answer, that we should use the chance. Is this a question, proper answer?
I think we should go to
okay, sorry. Okay,
Wasn't there a second question? Yeah.
Yeah, second question is what is? Sorry.
For this second question, perhaps Nagao-sensei will have a comment as well. But the world in 2030, of course, we never know. But then we might stop talking altogether, because we don't know what will happen tomorrow. So either you take that, you understand the world as, with a number of tendencies that you foresee as continuing for a little while, and then you make projections and you try and have a bit of strategic thinking and from there you make policy or you give up, really. So of course we speak with and we don't know what will happen, and of course everything's got to be taken with caution. But there are tendencies if you take and particularly in Asia, I'd say if you take the world as a whole, well, 9/11 was a massive change in the world. And before that, 1989, or you look at Asia, the North Korean program started at the end of the 1980s. China's rise, started from the 1990s. Of course, things change. Of course, North Korea, is becoming more and more nuclear, is becoming more able to miniaturize its nuclear weapons and to use them, and becoming more efficient at using ballistic missiles as well. You look at China, it's quite unpredictable what they might do. Perhaps they might try and take over the Senkaku. Of course, we don't know. But if you look at, we try and look at the world with a certain number of elements, and taking China's rise. Well, the assumption is that China will continue to rise, or it might not, because indeed, economic growth is slowing down, and they need to secure 10 million jobs a year, because 10 million young people arrive on the job market. So, of course, to a certain extent, there's a decline as well. It might very well explain, the military assertiveness. But that military assertiveness itself is likely to keep on going for a little while, if you like. So the assumptions, are that North Korea, basically that, if you look at international relations theory, well, the paradigms are fairly, it's that states will seek more power. That's what Japan is doing, that's what North Korea is doing, that's what China is doing. And that it seems fairly sensible and logical to assume that will keep going, and that's a tendency that's likely to be pursued for a little while. So, but of course we can't be sure.
Is this working? Okay. Sorry, I'm an undergrad student, so my question might not be as polished as the previous ones. It's for the second speaker. You showed us that new alliance that I think it was referred to as the Noodle Alliance earlier. In the new alliance, you've illustrated that Japan should be a possible player in the multilateral defense agreements and such. But isn't that a bit of a paradox or impossible? Because if Japan were to increase their military capability or become more independent, such as amending Article 9, it brings out this new issue of the ability of the U.S. to be dragged into conflicts started by Japan, such as the Senkaku Islands, which is the main one that's pointed at. As a result of that, isn't it fairly possible for the U.S. to suppress the attempt of this, either Japan becoming independent or this formation of a new alliance that is no longer U.S.-centered, as they always want, they always wanted to have a central influence in their allies' decision in starting conflicts. The only clear way Japan could be independent with this new alliance would be to end both Article 9 as well as the U.S. Defense Agreement, which is very unlikely, at least the latter one is. And even if the neighboring countries, such as in Pacific Asia, would strongly demand Japan to become a powerful country, don't you believe that because of the U.S., who is arguably the key ally Japan needs approval from, this would actually prevent this new alliance from ever happening, as it would be a liability to the states or weakens their power? If instead they don't amend Article 9 or end the U.S. security system and not become independent, in that case, they would seem like a free rider to the countries that they would have tried to attempt to create a multilateral defense agreement with. So don't you think that either way it's fairly impossible for Japan to be a part of this extensive network? Thank you.
I think in a way, the extensive network is being created. It's been created in the sense that Japan is developing very close defense relations with Australia, South Korea, India, and that's Nagao-san's sensei's core interests, and India, and then Southeast Asia as well. So it's actually being created now. And that's really actually welcomed by the US, because they've been encouraging that development for a while, and they themselves have been developing ties to those countries. So it's really happening. Both are happening concurrently, at the same time. In no way is that seen as likely to supplement the US-Japan alliance framework. It's part of the framework. It's something that the US has called for. And that should Japan become autonomous, obviously it wouldn't do it if all that framework were to be compromised. Because that's what Japan's security relies on by itself. No states can really cope by themselves now. Very few states can actually be there's NATO in Europe. The US are independent. They wanted to show that they needed no one when they fought back in after 9/11. So they first fought back by themselves before creating ISAF. But you know, the very few countries have this capability. I mean, the Europeans are trying to build European defense. The French can't do anything by themselves, and they certainly would not attempt to. They can fight back terrorism in their territory, but you know, that's the only thing they can manage to do, and not really by themselves, because you have this international ramifications. And so you know, the idea of Japan, and Japan is going in that way. I mean, towards more cooperation. You know, that when it got rid of the arms exports ban, it really was in order to ensure that it could cooperate, including in an industrial way. You know, over industrial projects, because it needs cooperation there, because they're more and more costly. So being autonomous, in no way, you know, wouldn't mean isolationism and being by yourself. I mean, that's North Korea, you know. So that would be Japan. That's not. I mean, being autonomous in the sense of if revising Article 9 were to mean that scenario, the one you're foreseeing, that would be excluded. You know, I mean, revising Article 9 would in no way be done in order to compromise Japan's security, which it would do, which it would if you know, it were done under the conditions which you described. But I mean, I think honestly, the Article 9 debate, in my view, is a bit misleading, because there's this political project, you know, that's been going on for the past 50 years anyway. It's been really ongoing since '55, and of course, you know, that stems from the war and all of that, and of course. A new generation of thinkers want a revision of Article 9, and security experts, you know, because they understand, you know, they would see it as legitimate, you know, they see it as an impediment, etc. And sure, you know, that's one view and one not. If you take a broader view, really, Article 9, I find, has been very useful to Japan, and I think that's Robert's view as well, actually. And also, it's a tool that's proved very adaptable. So in that sense, you know, given that the population is against anyway, you know, the reason why they keep on talking about it is that, you know, there's this political aim that they have, and they're hoping to achieve this, but, you know, by the time they can actually do it, I think they might have changed their mind and come to realize that there's no point in revising Article 9 anymore. I mean, apart from the political symbol, and if they did revise it, I think what they would do is keep the pacifist clause and just say, you know, we have a defense, we have a Jiagung, we have a self-defense army, self-defense armed forces. So it would be a sort of minimal, because in any case, to get the two-thirds of the two-thirds majority in each chamber, you know, you'd have to have a sort of very consensual reform. So you know, it shouldn't be taken too far. I mean, in a way, it's all very hypothetical.
My answer, even if the United States, Japan is a free rider, there's no possibility the US ignore Japan. In this means Japan is powerful, because US cannot ignore Japan, because Japan is powerful. If US ignore Japan, okay, I have already explained that about the Pacific, Japan's location and Japan's power is very important for the United States, I said, because one of the reasons is here, for United States do not need to, cannot ignore Japan's power. In this means Japan is powerful and Japan is stable, and Japan do not change security drastically. But to form the Asian NATO, indeed, yes, we have tried, but compared with the real NATO in Europe, there is a big difference in Asia and wider area. That is a big problem. Each country has in their interest, and how to integrate their interest is a very difficult job. And so maybe even if we form the Asian NATO in this area, it is more soft, not so integrated NATO will form, I think. That is my comment with
Yeah, is that all right? Okay, I wanted to quickly just go back to your opening comments about the economic condition of Japan. Obviously, it boasts the highest debt to GDP ratio of any of the OECD countries. And actually, the OECD presented their economic findings on Japan last week and mentioned that in the history of the OECD, no country has ever had that level of debt. So I was just wondering if you could elaborate on whether you think that acts as a constraint on Japan's powerful or powerlessness. And I just did a quick calculation. I mean, if Japan was to increase their defense expenditure from 1% to 2% of GDP, it would cost every man, woman, and child an extra 50,000 yen per annum per year. So I was just wondering if there is an appetite among the Japanese public, and maybe Nagao-sensei could answer that. And just quickly again on France versus Japan. France spends 1.7% of GDP on defense, but Japan only spends 1%. Why do you think that difference exists, and why are the French willing to invest so much?
I'm not sure it's all that much. I mean, if you listen to the French Defense Forces, they actually tell you that they don't have enough, and they're really on a great strains and all of that. So 1.7 is actually quite low. For Japan to spend more is actually, yes, that's a big step. Of course, in absolute value, you realize that there's a difference. There's probably yes. After that, I won't go into budget comparisons, because that's a bit then you'd have to integrate the alliance, the cost of the forces, all of that. So that's all a bit. And Nagao-sensei will comment on the what the Japanese might want. Public debt, yes, indeed, of course, it's a massive public debt, and public debt is always a liability. The fact is, the Japanese are in an advantageous situation because the public debt is actually owned by Japanese investors. So for the moment, they don't have to worry about quotation agencies and all of that, which is, of course, a great advantage, because otherwise they're rated rating agencies. They're actually rated B minus, I think. So, but it doesn't bother them for the moment. So that's great. But I think they've got another 10 years to go like that before they'll have to turn to international markets for financing, because simply with the population aging and pensions costing more and more, at some point, national savings may not be enough for the government to keep on to sustain the debt. So then Japan will have a problem. So and of course it's not Abe's fault. I mean his policies seem to be really Abenomics was they put so much effort in making them work. You would have expected them to work, indeed. Apart from the fact that they left structural reform for later, which in my view is a mistake. Of course, it's always more difficult to reform structurally, but of course, the greatest advantage they had was that the yen, the yen's value never decreased. I mean, hardly or very little, and then went up again because the pound went down at some point, because the euro is so low, because of the euro crisis and the refugee crisis, and so the yen, no matter what they did to lower the value of the yen, it didn't work. So that of course was very detrimental. They increased the public debt, hoping to create a virtuous cycle. And that never happened. So that was a bet that the government partly lost. But at least unemployment rate is low, which does have disadvantages actually, because it means wages are not rising. So they do have problems, but in a sense they're blessed with very low rates.
I had some information with your comment. Can you imagine if you get big money suddenly, we cannot understand how to use it. Defense policy is very delicate jobs. Maybe which side should use, what kind of equipment we need, how to use that, how to develop the defense policy, how to develop the strategy, how to use this equipment tactically. All of this research and decision has made. After that, we get the money. This means that it is not easy to increase defense budget suddenly. So even if the Trump demands Japan, you should increase budget. We have a will, but it is not easy to decide how to use it. This is the situation. So maybe we need to increase the defense budget. Is very long process. We need to take. That is my comment. Ed, you answer.
Yes, not necessarily for the report, just out of personal interest. I work for the European Union. I wanted to go back to Professor Delamotte's first remark about striking difference in patterns of action between France and Japan, and also linked to Professor Nago's question about what is power for Japan. Because, for example, France acted alone in some instances, in Mali, for example, against terrorists. Then it also works quite a lot with partners. It has also offensive capacities. Sometimes, like in Syria, it decides to refrain from action when a major partner is not ready to do it. And I wanted to ask for you, what would be signs of a more powerful Japan? We have evoked different possibilities. Is it because Japan in the future acquires more offensive capacity or has offensive capacities? Is it the day, for example, we have seen China also in the Libyan crisis, they did not have any aggressive action, but they sent some ships to take care of their own citizens. So it was a kind of a statement where Chinese ships in the Mediterranean taking care of themselves. And so would it be because Japan is ready to act against terrorists or even pay ransom to terrorists when some of the allies say, no, you should not? Or is it when, for example, Prime Minister Abe tells Mr. President Obama, I know you don't like me to talk with Putin, but I have to, so I will do it. So I'd like you to comment on this. What would be signs of a more powerful Japan?
Thanks very much. Yes, with everything, all of Japan's assets, you might think that the question was out of beyond the point, really. That Japan indeed is powerful enough. But I mean, my reply would be, Japan will be powerful enough, or is powerful enough, if Japan can do whatever it needs or feels it must do, or wants to do. So that would be my reply, and Japan being in that sense the government elected by the people, with the approval of the people. So, and I think in that sense, there probably needs to be, with the increasing powers of the Prime Minister in the field of defense, I think there probably should be a change in the people's mindset when they vote, because I don't think they ever considered defense policy seriously. They left it aside. They were always, fairly sympathetic to the socialist views and always left it aside. I think now they should consider that they have a prime minister who can actually take their country to war, and when they choose someone to decide for them, that should be one element they indeed take into account. Whereas until now, which is what the French do when they elect the president, they choose someone who will be able to make decisions in difficult crisis situation, and so foreign policy and defense are very big decision-making elements. So that's probably something that the Japanese need to integrate still. But so that would be my reply. When the Japanese government has, so does it actually now have them? In my view, it does. With the 2015 reform in the field of security, I feel that, and that's what Nagao Sensei said as well. It can now do pretty much what it wants. So I think it pretty much reached the point where it wanted to go. The question is, they seem to have an ultimate goal that goes back every, whenever it's take an extra step, then the further goal seems to appear. So now, the question is offensive capabilities or not. Is that needed? I'm not convinced. I don't know. It's not for me to reply.
My comment is related with one question. So, sorry. Yeah, because my voice is relatively big, so sometimes mic break my voice. But yes, to record it is important. I understand. Thank you. And the related question that I will answer is: will Japan intervene in the situation in the Middle East, or the terrorists in the Middle East, including IS? Of course, Japan have a will to contribute the effort implemented by the other allies, but at the same time, view from Japanese, if we can escape, we want to escape. Because the main target of the Islamic terrorists is not Japanese, we know that. And it's not our area now. That means that I'm afraid to say Japanese can escape. Most Japanese feel. So that is the reason when Abe expressed to contribute the situation in the Middle East, after that IS killed one hostage, Japanese hostage. After that, many people criticized Prime Minister Abe, not IS. So that is such kind of situation exists, and for Japan security, yes, that it's a logical response. We believe that is true, but at the same time, if we do not respect the effort of the allies will not respect our effort in this area. We know that. So as an ally, we will try to respond silently. For example, the refugees face the crisis. Of course, Japan donates money. That is the situation we see now. The reason is I have already explained.
Thank you very much. So I'm sorry, we've reached the end of. So thank you very much to all of you for coming. I'd like you to make one short comment. There's a question about budgets. You know, if you compare to the Cold War, all developed countries spend very little. I mean, far poor European nations in the 1960s, 1970s were at 3 or 4% of GDP with conscription. So what Japan spends, what the European nations spend today is extremely small. And so is the US defense budget. It's about 45% of GDP, which historically is not very high. And you know, if you want to stimulate the economy, it's generally very efficient. And as for national debt, of course, what made the UK so powerful in the 18th century was its ability to create a national debt to finance the state. I mean, that's an essential element of state power. So thanks again. Thank you very much, Guibourg. Thank you very much, Dr. Nagao. Thank you all for coming to our luncheon events. And we don't have anything until Golden Week. So we wish you a very happy Golden Week. We do have an event in New York just after Golden Week with Alessio Patalano, and obviously we'll have many more events in Tokyo, including a session on cybersecurity with Mio Matsubara, who's one of our new adjunct fellows, who's from Palo Alto Networks. So thanks again, and if you didn't get an invitation, give us your business card, but frankly, rather than having your business cards, we'd rather have your money so you can make a donation to the box. And I'm sorry for all of you who didn't have time to ask questions, but we have to vacate the room pretty soon. Thanks again. Thank you.